Good afternoon, everyone. I am Marie Rumenap, and I am with Michigan State University in the School of Planning, Design, and Construction as an Extension Outreach Specialist. And I'm very pleased today to be moderating our last National Urban Extension Leaders 4Ps professional development webinar. And today's topic is on personnel. And we've got four experts in this area that we're going to be hearing from. Julie Fox, who is with the Ohio State University, Ramona Manhosing-Hector, who is with the University of Florida Institute for Food, Agriculture, and Sciences Extension, and Alyssa Bowers, who is with Washington State University Extension, and Christine Hines, who's with the University of Kentucky. And so we're going to first hear from Julie Fox and Ramona and Alyssa. So I'm going to put their slides up. And as I do that, I will tell you just maybe a little bit more about these individuals. Okay, I believe you are now seeing slides. Is that correct, everyone? Okay, great. So this team of individuals that are going to talk to us first are Julie Fox, who is at the Ohio State University. And Julie is the director of Ohio State University Extension for Strategic Initiatives and Urban Engagements. And then we're also going to hear from Ramona Manhosing-Hector. And Ramona is, as I said, at the University of Florida with their IFAS extension system. And she is a specialized agent, a regional specialized agent, and her focus is urban environment and sustainability. And lastly, this team includes Alyssa Bowers, who is with Washington State University Extension, and she is the County Extension Director in King County, which is Seattle. So with that, I'm not sure, Julie, Alyssa, who's starting out, and I'm thinking Ramona is going to be joining us shortly, but I have your slides up and take it away.
Well, Marie, thank you for moderating today. And if you would, maybe just hit the next slide. I also want to give a shout out to Brenda Rogers from the University of Florida, longtime leader of the National Urban Extension Leaders Professional Development Action Team, where a lot of good things have happened. So thank you for your leadership and being a part of this. And Martha Aitken from the National Urban Research and Extension Center out of Washington State, who's helped fund a lot of the work that we're going to talk about today. So thank you for that. And I don't know, Marie, if you can launch this poll or not, but we're gonna, agenda-wise, have a quick poll, kind of look at an overview of some needs of professional development for urban extension professionals. And then we'll share some work that we've done around competencies and how Alyssa and others have continued to grow that work. We've used a process called persona analysis and development to design some professional development work. Lots of good resources and connections. And Christine, I look forward to hearing about your good project from Kentucky. So,
Okay. Julie, I cannot launch the poll, but Ramona indicated to me you guys could ask the questions and we could drop the information in chat if we could do it that way.
we sure could. We've got a relatively small group today, and Ramona is presenting to a national conference, so I'm not sure she'll be able to join us. She's been a great colleague, and continues to develop this work for urban extension professionals. So since it's kind of small, why don't we just go ahead and roll to the next slide and kind of keep things moving, Marie.
Okay.
I don't know if we all want to provide feedback to this or not, but do you think there are different professional expectations and different needs for extension personnel working in urban environments versus suburban or rural? And you could just in chat, you can put a yes, a no, I'm not sure. If there's something that in addition, you have on your mind that you want to include in chat, maybe from an experience or conversation that you've had with some of your colleagues in your state. But do you think there are different expectations of us and our colleagues in urban environments compared to others, and maybe some different needs? You can put it in chat or you can just unmute and do a shout out. I see Marie, expectations not regularly, but think maybe there should be some different expectations. I know in some of our urban communities, we have different positions that are maybe a little different than what you might see in an urban community. They might come in, somebody might come in on a project basis or part-time basis, special contract that we have or something like that. So Martha, yes, expectations and needs with as we address the scale, just the size of the population in our urban communities, that diversity, the complexity of working with so many different jurisdictions and stakeholders in our communities. Any other comments in chat, or anybody want to jump in?
Yes, I was going to say that I think there are different needs. I feel like that in most of the cases, I mean, everybody's got to be able to present, whether you're from a rural or urban environment. You have to have presentation skills. But in the rural environment, I think it's more about your specialty and presenting your knowledge and your science. And what I've seen in the urban environment is that you have to have that same knowledge and expertise in your science, but you have to be able to bring people together. You have to collaborate. You have to sometimes generate your audience by partnering with other organizations. And so some of those skills that are, I don't know, more I don't want to say soft skills because they're very strong and hard, but those skills that bring people together are more necessary in the urban environment. In the rural environment, sometimes you're the only game in town, and that breeds participation. And so I think those are some of the differences in the challenge.
I would agree totally with what Brenda has shared. And I would add to it, although again, I think these skills are necessary for extension staff, regardless of the geography or audience that they're working with. I think in urban areas, because of the scale of the potential audience, the complexity of the audience, and sometimes because you're not the only game in town, the sophistication of choices that the audience has also means you need to have a higher level ability to do environmental scanning around needs assessment, partners you work with, reading the political environment, because there are so many choices to be made, both by you as a staff person, as well as others around you in terms of who they're choosing to work with. Where my experiences in more rural or small or suburban areas, as opposed to large metropolitan areas, there's just not as many choices, and so people don't have to hone those skills as well. So that's the other thing. So I think the skill sets again are the same, but the mastery it needs to be at a higher level. I also think in terms of an expert, in rural areas, oftentimes you're working directly with an audience, and in urban areas, one of the ways we work to expand our ability to work in urban spaces is to work with other professionals who are working in that expertise area and train them so they can then disseminate that. So I always call that sort of like the retail to wholesale model of extension, where in rural communities it's very much retail. You work directly with the consumer, where in urban areas you have an opportunity to do more wholesale work, where you're working with like maybe a middle organization where they would then work directly with a consumer of the knowledge base.
Interesting comments. Thank you for sharing that. Anything else before we go to the next slide? All right, let's roll. So just a bit of background. The National Urban Research and Extension Center, formerly the Western Metro Center, has funded a number of different fellows, including myself, Ramona, and Alyssa, and others. And this being one of Newell's, the National Urban Extension Leaders, 4 Ps, being positioning, our programs, our personnel, and our partnerships. We really wanted to better understand, what we were talking about in regard to staffing and preparing our workforce and some of those professional development things that we just talked about. So this document is online. I can put the link in chat. And this is a panel presentation we did when the National Urban Extension Conference was in Seattle. Brenda, I believe you were on that panel as well. And together we kind of just documented at that point in time, here's how things were emerging. So when the 4P framework was developed back in 2015, that's where we looked at those 4Ps. We kind of framed what we were talking about, and we continue to learn with one another. And hopefully today's conversation and some of the work that we're sharing and what happens moving forward will continue to build on this. So so that document is one of kind of the deliverables or outputs that came from that. And on the next slide, then, as you see, hey, thank you, Martha, for putting that in. Very nice. I had the link open, but that was very smooth. So you can see how some other things have developed. I mentioned, kind of setting up that framework, and Brenda, I think Brenda and Marie were instrumental in kind of a personnel survey back in 2017 to better understand what we were doing. We had that conversation, that survey launched at the National Urban Extension Conference when it was in Minnesota. And, based on that, we're like, okay, what can we now learn from that feedback? And thanks to the Western Center, now National Center, we did a competency framework development project where we brought together urban extension leaders from some of the largest counties in each of the geographic areas that the Extension Committee on Organization Policy have identified. And we asked them, it's like in real world, like really, like, what do you do? What do you need? What skills do you need to have? And based on that competency framework, then we build some resources to learn. And that was, specifically from that kind of county extension director's point of view, but certainly some of those same types of things flowed to any type of position, because in our on our urban teams, they're not huge teams, and then we really need to all have kind of step up and be leaders, which we often talk about with Newell. Continue to look at things. We brought together a group kind of pre-conference before a Joint Council of Extension Professionals Leadership Conference in Texas, and really thought through, okay, what does this look like from each program area? What does this look like from different types of positions? And so based on that summit and some work that we did, we continued the conversation, if you will. And the Western Center, now National Center, has continued to fund some fellowships, and we'll share some of the resources that have come as a result of that. And Alyssa, I look forward to hearing some of the work that continues to emerge. So that's kind of how things have progressed from 2015 to today. And as we look at the next slide, then kind of following that, one of the things that we did is kind of, again, frame what we're talking about professional development and urban extension, and have that as a foundation for our work. And then from Korn Ferry, which is a for-public company that really works with talent, with leaders from around the world, they use this framework called here you have a diagram with 4, with competencies being one piece of that, but really looking at that whole person. And I think in all of our extension environments, but especially in our urban environments, recognizing the value of experiences that people bring to their role, because we're attracting people who have previously worked for public agencies, for large nonprofits in urban communities. So what have they learned from those experiences that really they bring to their work in addition to those competencies? And kind of that's like kind of what they do in their position. And then that lower part is who they are. And those are the motivations and drivers, like what drives them to do this type of work, and what are those characteristics and traits. And so many of us during our professional development, have the Myers-Briggs assessment or change style indicator and strength finders and all those kinds of things that help us really, think about that. And so so we look at that as a whole kind of whole person, and the competencies are certainly important because they're observable. You can develop those, but recognizing and appreciating those other things that are part of us as individual professionals and part of our teams, including our volunteers, the people that are doing the work at day in and day out, our administrators, and framing it in that way so we can be more thoughtful as we develop, as we attract and develop talent in our urban extension community work. So based on that, I'm going to go to next slide. Any questions about the Korn Ferry model? It's called the 4 dimensions. I hate to bring another up 4 because we're talking about the 4 P. Those are the 4 dimensions of talent and leadership. But I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa because I think that you and Ramona have done some great work to even take this a step further.
Yeah, so like Julie said, we were one of the fellowships from Wickmer. Ramona and I built on both some of Julie's work and Ramona's earlier work. On the 2-year fellowship, we did the first year was basically doing a literature review and a white paper, which is posted, and I can put that in the chat as well, that describes our literature review. Just of all of the amazing work, a lot of it's from Julie and some of the other people you see here. So what we did was kind of contextualize that Korn Ferry and put it within the context factors. So things like your state, where you're located, different things like that, your partners that you work with. And then that is also situated within institutional factors. So we're all at different institutions. So those kind of things affect our work on a day-to-day basis. And then the last one is the structure and equity factors. Those things are kind of generally outside of our control, and they're just still, but they affect our work in a large way. But our work is focused on that Korn Ferry piece, that middle circle, because those are the things we can kind of control as individuals. The competencies, experiences, traits, and drivers that Julie was mentioning. And yeah, so that was the first year of the work. And then the next year was, and you'll see on the next slide, you can go to the next slide, is a little bit of the survey needs assessment that we did. So we surveyed both administrators and also like extension professionals, more the boots on the ground folks, and kind of 2 different surveys because there's a little bit of different skills and we wanted to kind of compare and contrast. We're in the process of analyzing that data right now, but this is one of the early just graphs. You can see the extension admin is the light green and the professionals, those are like your agents and program assistants, those kind of things. We did a nationwide survey, but you can see that it was pretty similar, that both the admin professionals and the extension boots on the ground folks, their answers were pretty aligned, which was really interesting for us. We're excited to see how the data analysis continues to evolve, and we are going to post another paper and hopefully do a journal article detailing all this work coming in the next year too. So it's really interesting to see what people's priorities were and what people need in urban areas. The next slide.
So it's fun to see though that develop, Alyssa, that not only that whole person perspective, but in the context, right, of the work that we do. So one of the things we wanted to do is like, well, okay, so what? How can we apply some of this information? And Martha, thank you for putting those resources in chat. So in the application of this, there's something called persona analysis. It's also often used in design work, IT work. It's not to generalize or stereotype people into groups, but to really kind of take a personal approach by having a person or persona as we think through what are those competencies and behaviors, and what are the experiences, those traits and drivers. And then from a professional development standpoint, what challenges does that person face? What support do they need that might be similar or different to the support that somebody else might need? And then where are they getting their professional development in their urban community? And so to move that work forward, Martha, Ramona, Brenda, others have really all kind of come together with others to have some conversations with groups nationally, and to take that conversation even forward And as you look at the next slide, Marie, here's an example where we look at this one persona and thinking through, all right, from her point of view, and I think in this case, she's a local food educator. Another persona is an administrator. Another persona is Veronica, the volunteer. You kind of get the vibe there of having different personas. But here's a new hire who's brought in for local food systems work. And so really thinking through, all right, what experiences is she bringing to the table, and what is her motivation? Um, and then taking that even a step further and think, okay, from a competency wise, what are and professional development wise, and working that through. And Martha, I don't know if we have a link to maybe a recorded webinar or anything of the work that we've done with this persona analysis, or even the worksheet I think we took to the National Urban Extension Conference in Nashville. But if you wanted to play around with this idea, there's some good work when it comes to using persona analysis to help with design and development, including the work that we do, the professional development we do with urban extension. And I think on the next slide, I don't know if we take it a step further, but this idea of kind of understanding that that urban context of what kind of knowledge they need to have about the urban environment, what kind of urban strategic skills do they need to have. And again, that's different based on the type of position that we found through our conversations. So then the next slide. Many, many resources. Our acronyms, if you're new to the conversation, NUL is the National Urban Extension Leaders. LITSI is Leadership in the City. I've got a single slide that I'll share with you on that. Epsilon Sigma Phi is Professional Association for Extension Professionals. And UCDA is the, anybody can help me here with the urban.
Culturally diverse
diverse.
audiences.
Thank you. It's an affinity group. Boy, you talk about great professional development. That group has a great, diverse group of leaders, and they put together some great professional development that I think that's also recorded. And then NURC, formerly WECMR for the acronym fans out there, the National Urban Research and Extension Center. And it's really been exciting to see how that Western Center has grown to become a national effort and establish some new partners and projects with our work. So when it comes to, looking at professional development for urban extension professionals, I would add here too, the Joint Council of Extension Professionals. For example, the 4-H group, they have an urban interest group that meets, as does, as I mentioned, the ESP or the Epsilon Sigma Phi. I spoke at the National Ag Agents Conference earlier this year, and they had urban extension as a capstone presentation. And it was great to see people's response and interest. And so I think any of the Joint Council of Extension Professionals organizations, I think will continue to see growth when it comes to urban integrated into their professional development work they do, currently do, as well as maybe some special interest webinars, publications, and additional research. So when we look at those resources, next slide. And this is not a quiz, like you don't have to match an acronym with a name or anything like that, but that's there. So Leadership in the City is a curriculum that I developed about 5 or 6 years ago to really build on the existing professional development that we all get from our past work, perhaps from our work in extension. And a couple of things that I really wanted to weave into that based on the competency framework development process is this entrepreneurial thread. And some people kind of have a misconception of what it means to be entrepreneurial. But Marie, if you hit the animation, I think once or twice, it kind of a concise definition that Ramona has helped me clarify and hone. Even one more there, Marie, is that kind of be it as entrepreneurial leaders, whether you're in a public or a private organization, like whatever role and whatever work that you that you cultivate this kind of collaborative environment. Because it takes a team to make some entrepreneurial things happen. And then prioritizing being proactive with your stakeholder engagement, staying close, to your audiences, proactive and opportunity pursuit, creating value through innovation, mobilizing resources, and that's where some influence comes into play, and accountability. Some people think being entrepreneurial is like just being off on your own and doing your own thing. And it's really not. It's proactive, it's collaborative, and a lot of accountability comes with that collaboration. Sorry. With that entrepreneurial thread, the looking to leadership, literature and practice, that there's a lot to learn about entrepreneurial leadership that applies to our work. It's natural. Entrepreneurial environments, and we, interestingly, really work at this intersection of urban community and our land grant universities. I'm sorry. And what does that look like for our work? And then entrepreneurial innovation, entrepreneurial marketing, you get the idea. The course is 6 months long, with recorded videos, some relevant activities to apply your learning to the real work that you do, some video conference sessions to connect with others around the country, where you're like, hey, my tribe, my people, we're coming together to learn together, which is really that peer learning, a really rich part of the course. And then we get together at the National Urban Extension Conference. The last cohort, Ramona taught. And so that course continues to develop based on what we've learned in the past and what's emerging moving forward. But right now I'm going to turn over the next slide or to Christina, and I'm going to get a drink of water.
Okay, well, before we go to Christina, I want to thank Julia, Alyssa, for being here with us today, and Ramona as well, for helping to put this together, and all three of them for their work. I'm wondering if we have any questions before we go to Christina, maybe just real quick. Because I know we're going to kind of change gears in terms of looking at like another professional development opportunity that anybody has. And I think we've got a little bit of time to answer a question or two if there is any.
I have a question for Alyssa. So as you and Ramona are moving forward with your fellowship work, has there been something that like kind of surprised you or intrigued you? Like, I want to know more about this, and that you look forward to in your next steps of your work?
Yeah, it's been interesting, like I was saying, how that we expected there to be kind of some differences in the two surveys, and it seems like they were really aligned, which was really surprising a little bit. Because we thought that the admin would have a slightly different take on things. And I kind of want to dig a little deeper into that. We started kind of playing around with um some of the like statistical significant stuff that Qualtrics has. Um, but we really want to start reaching out to other folks that are doing this work, like some of the other Whitmer fellows, and kind of collaborate and see how we can develop a actual some kind of professional development. Where our goal was a toolkit, but we still don't know exactly what that is going to be. We have a lot of handouts and things. But we're really excited on actually building a program that people might be able to use in their day-to-day life, if it's a workbook or whatever it is, something that complements your work and the other work that's going on. That's what we're really, really excited about, digging into that.
I think it'd be really useful because not only for the extension professionals themselves, but certainly those that hire, help develop, or mentor, our administrators, those working directly with our human resource units, right? Helping that whole system better understand what it looks like and what we can do together. And I think there are not only similarities, to the two audiences you looked at, but there are similarities also with some of, urban and suburban work, but really continue to kind of ferret out what does that look like from that urban dynamic of, the scale, diversity, complexity, and that urban-rural interface. So I look forward to seeing what's next.
Sorry, Julie. Yeah, I was gonna say, I dropped a question in the chat because I wanted to kind of frame it and so others could see it. But I'm also wondering, in the work that you guys have done, if you at any point looked at the extension competency assessment work that Chuck Hibbard did sometime around 2008, I think it was. It was like the late 2000s there, maybe as late as 2010, but I think it was a little earlier. He looked at the necessary staff competencies, and that was a project that ECOP supported. So it's one that I know extension directors nationally at that time and others saw the results of. But he looked at like extension educator level positions for necessary competencies. No questions were asked about geographic assignments or programmatic assignments. It was just competencies in general. So I'm asking this question because I've wondered, as I've seen some of your work, and I saw Chuck's work, which was just in general, what the differences or similarities might be in some of the things that you're finding around competencies versus those that Chuck found that might help us be able to articulate to individuals leading extension systems what the differences are, because they always ask like what's different about extension in urban spaces versus rural, or what's the difference in competencies, and so I just wondered if you guys are familiar with that work, if you've looked at that work, if you've done any comparisons to what you're finding and what Chuck found.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Marie. In preparation for the competency framework development process, we reviewed the literature that was out there, Chuck and his team, as well as a number of others. And it's curious because while we're doing this work in the urban context, this competency work and extension continues to evolve and emerge. I think Suzanne Winston and others, like they continue to build on this. So I think it's a constant development of, okay, what's done broadly and what's uniquely urban, what's done broadly and what's uniquely urban. But in looking at that initially, like there's a lot of information out there to look at his, as well as some within different JSEP, Joint Council of Extension Professionals groups, like some just looked at 4-H, for example, or other program areas, and to look at that and really to see kind of how they're grouped, right?
Yeah.
And so within those groupings, there's certainly some similarities. And then seeing, okay, what does that look like then in that urban context? Because you can say this is a competency, but in urban context, what might that look like? And so, yeah, I'd be, happy to dig that back out, and maybe even, Alyssa, you and Ramona want to take a look at that in light of some of the other things that have emerged, even in the last few months, with some articles that have come out on competencies and extension. But there's been a lot of a rich foundation that we continue to build on. And again, our role is like, okay, in the urban context, what does this look like?
Yeah, and I think that that's the question, amongst other things, that we get asked from sort of the Newell perspective all the time. What is different? What is different about the competencies? What is different about the staffing pattern? What is different about the programming? What is different? And so helping to answer any of those specific questions related to what is different about extensions work in general or across all geographies, and that specific to urban, is I think very helpful to the system at this point in time.
Well, and I also think, Marie, I mean, and you did a good job in your dissertation and some other things that you've written. I think we do a decent job of throwing out what's different with the environments of working in more urban spaces versus more, suburban or rural, et cetera, but I don't know that we break it down, for example, okay, so what does that mean for competencies? What does that mean for, some of these other specific aspects? And I've run into a lot of individuals talking about how they view the urban space more as a, like we have 4-H, we have FCS, we have, almost like it's similar in that area. And I'm like, no, you can actually be in an urban space and be doing 4-H and be doing FCS and things like that. And so then that even adds another, I don't want to say layer of complexity, but I mean, just another consideration, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, food for thought, all. Thank you again, Alyssa, Julie, and for being here today, and Ramona for contributing to this work as well. Great stuff. We truly appreciate it. With that, I'm going to shift gears for us. And our next presenter is Christina Haynes, who is with the University of Kentucky, where she is in the College of Education. She's an associate professor and extension leadership development specialist there. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Marie. And I'm just making sure I can get my technology to work.
Great.
It is not showing, showing what I want to show. So let's try this one more time.
Marie, we need to make Christina a co-host.
Oh, maybe
That
that's
allows her to share a screen.
me try. So maybe it's me who's deficient here, Chris. Let's
Well, I'm
try.
trying to show, I know I can easily show it if I have to find it. All right, let's see if that helps.
Yeah, let's see if that helps. Thank you, Brenda, for helping to troubleshoot that. Appreciate it. Oh, there we've got something, Chris.
But it's not, okay, what can you see? You can't
We
see the slides, can you?
no, we see a toolbar of sorts.
It's not gonna work. All right, let's stop this. Let me reopen. Well, so I'm gonna see, let's see if I could actually multitask here, which is trying to open something while I'm going to just give you a little bit of background.
Hey, Christina, if you want to email it to me and I'll share and I'll forward the slides for you.
Well, that's okay. So
Or
here's my
you can email them
question.
to me too, Chris, and I can try and get them up.
All right, it's in a PDF. Will that show?
I think so.
All right,
Yeah.
well, let's give her a heck. Okay. All right, Marie, I have just sent them to you, so let's hope that you have more luck than I do.
Okay, great. While I'm waiting for those to come through, Chris, why don't you start by maybe giving a little bit of a background on the work that you and some of your other colleagues in Kentucky are doing?
Absolutely. So, and that's where I was kind of, there we go. There we go. All right. I just sent it to you, Marie.
Okay,
All
good.
right. So basically, probably about 10 years ago, we had a reorganization within Kentucky that helped to form what Jeff Young has headed up now. It's probably been about 10 years, which is an emphasis on the kind of in the urban spaces. Here in Kentucky, we have three primary kind of more populated areas around Lexington, which is right in the center of the state. We've got Louisville, which kind of borders the Indiana. It's on the left side. And then we have up close to Cincinnati, which is kind of in the Covington area. And so we realized that when kind of Jeff took this over and started really looking at what is a little bit different about what urban agents do in more populated spaces, he started doing a lot of different things from a lot of different areas, if you will. But we realized that the traditional core training, kind of bringing new agents in and teaching them all the basics of extension was a good start, but it wasn't getting at some of the more challenging aspects that we had in our urban spaces. And it wasn't even challenging as far as, it's things like working with different populations and diverse populations and populations that may have different languages. It's working in, and we've heard this a lot from our urban agents, it's feeling like you have to be everything for everybody all the time, which in a rural space, okay, so you might have a county or a town of 500 to 1,000. Well, you can be kind of everything for everybody. Well, then our urban agents are saying things like, well, I live, on the outskirts of Louisville and we have, 5 million people. And so not only do I have to be an expert in A, B, and C, but I also have to work with the suburban audiences and I have to know about urban farming and, all of these different types of things, as well as the fact that a lot of urban agents have expressed that they do lots and lots of things and they don't necessarily feel like, and some of these are outside of the traditional realm of extension, and they don't feel like that a lot of these they're actually getting credit for in the more traditional evaluation spaces. So these were just a few of the things that kind of popped up when we started really looking into, what is a little bit different about being an agent in a more urban space. I was working,
Correct.
I'm the leadership development specialist for extension at the university. I'm in kind of a weird space. I'm now in the College of Education. I'm one of 3 specialists at UK that are not in the College of Ag. So I'm in a little bit different area. But my primary specialty is community leadership and adult education. And so we did a lot with, adult leadership development and curriculum development and things like that. But I jumped in with Jeff because I was like, okay, this is definitely a space that really needs some work down here in Kentucky. And so between the three of us, and then I also work with my husband who is specializes in civic engagement and community education. And we sat down and we're like, okay, what does it look like for not only just core training of agents that are working in urban spaces, but what really does this space of kind of the urban extension aspect look like, especially down here in Kentucky? And when we sat down and thought about it, have you gotten it, Marie?
No,
Haven't
Chris,
gotten it?
I have not. And Julie's email is there too, if you want to try to send it to her, but no,
This is
Julie
where
is in the
this is
chat.
this is where if you were in a classroom, you just kind of roll with it. You're like, oh, there's no
Yeah,
PowerPoint or something like that.
yeah.
We're
And you
just
were
gonna
doing a
roll
great
with it.
job of rolling.
Thanks. Well, I'm gonna keep rolling, although it would be really helpful. Okay, Julie, I just emailed it to you too. So let's see if one of you can get it so I can
Okay.
possibly. Okay, I just sent it to you too.
Okay, keep
Anyway, so
rolling, Chris.
so we sat down and we were like, okay, it's just not necessarily about doing new professional developments, although that is definitely a space that we saw need in. But we were also thinking along the realms of what about research? And that's actually one of the first places I ran into you, Marie, as far as looking at your dissertation. And there was some other papers out there, but there wasn't a ton. I mean, especially when you start looking very heavily at specifically focused on the unique needs, the unique aspects that you deal with when you're working in more populated areas. And so one of the other aspects that we came up with was there's definitely research that needs to be done, continued. And I've always said this, I also teach in undergrad spaces, but I'm always like, I think good extension work is founded by good research, as just as well as good teaching is founded by good research and outreach. And so there's connections between all of those. There was another space that we came up with. Oh, thank you, Julie. All right. Go down to we'll just start with go down to the bottom. There we go. Yeah, we'll start with the easier one first.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you very much. Sorry, my technology is not working great today. So then we started thinking also about this idea of community engagement and the fact that, even the way that you engage within urban spaces is a little bit different oftentimes than you do in more rural spaces and less populated spaces. Ultimately, a lot of times agents within more, less populated spaces are looked upon as kind of the resident expert of fill in the blank, basically. And when you start getting into more populated areas, not only are there more resources, but in a lot of cases, there's just such a population and such a demand that you can't be the expert for everything. So a lot of times you have to be more of a convener, and then you start thinking about, okay, so how do we engage different aspects of community that I work in, when you're working in a more urban space. And the last piece that we came up with was extension, as we all know, is a super traditional field. I mean, it comes from tradition. I would argue in 1914, extension was absolutely super innovative for that time. I also still think extension does fabulous work today. However, we definitely come from a more traditional background. And so when you start talking about extension differently, how do we evaluate urban extension agents? Do we evaluate them the same way that we evaluate more rural, even if they're doing different things? How do we how do you communicate as an urban extension agent? Is that different than how we can do things in rural areas, et cetera, et cetera? You have to start looking at that space a little bit differently. And that goes into advocacy with people within the leadership realm as well, administration, leadership, people providing the funding strings, et cetera, et cetera. So when we sat down, this was, and I'm showing the kind of the more simplified this version of this one. This simplified version actually came out of the Urban Extension Initiative, which is what kind of came out of this collaboration between myself, Jeff Young, and Brian Haynes. We ended up doing a strategic plan and visioning and kind of coming back and saying, okay, we did this a year ago. Now, how have things changed? Do we want to really hone it in a little bit more with Marie and her group? And so this actually, the simplified version, was a result of doing that entire process. And we'll go here in just a second to the more specific and more detailed version of this. But ultimately, the overall purpose of this entire initiative and of what we've been trying to do within this space now going on, I feel like we're going on, 8 to 10 years, is not only communicating the value of urban audiences, but also the value of our agents within urban spaces. Be more relevant and continue to be relevant. Extension has traditionally had a challenge with that, and we need to keep being relevant in all of our spaces, but especially urban. And then ultimately, not only recruit diverse employees, which obviously, people are in a lot of cases more likely to connect with people that, maybe come from similar backgrounds and have similar experiences, but also just create awareness. Because I think in a lot of cases, people aren't aware of, especially in urban spaces, the usefulness and the beauty of what Extension does. So we came up with these 4 different areas. Julie, if you'll flip to the top one that's more detailed. And this really is what drives the different activities and the different things we're trying to do down here in Kentucky. And so as you can see, this is just a much more kind of detailed version of it. We definitely have some unique aspects that we try to do with the community engagement. We're still, COVID kind of took a chunk out of this because there was all these things we had planned. And then we were like, oh, got to go back to the drawing board because nobody's doing a speed dating event in downtown Louisville and it's COVID. So we have all these great ideas and we're still, there's still a lot of these on the books to do in the future. But even to the idea of going into more urban spaces and like Louisville, for example, and connecting some of the civic leadership and the nonprofits and the individuals that we work with in that downtown area, connect them to our local agents and say, hey, did you guys know that y'all are kind of working on some similar things? Maybe we can make a connection and a contact. And what is community engagement? What is the best practices? What does that look like? Does it look like, is it different when you engage with different cultures and different audiences like that within an urban space? So these are the more detailed. Advocacy is without question the hardest space that we have, because advocacy is one of those things where you've just kind of got to get an entree into it. And I'm not saying that there's not open-minded people with an extension, but Marie, you and I have had this conversation over and over again where, in a lot of cases, it comes down to, well, if we just had more money, we could do this. Or if we just did, if we got rid of everything traditional of extension and focused on this, we could do, and nobody wants to do that. And so those conversations are a little more challenging to have. But it doesn't mean that they don't exist and there's not a need. The research, as you can see, and we've been doing this little by little, if I had another 3 or 4 grad students and another 24 hours every day, it would be a lot easier. But we've been doing little pieces of this research and had some different papers published, but there's always room for more. And that's me throwing out, if anybody's interested in doing, some of this collaborative research to get at these aspects. Similar to the competencies one that you put up earlier, Marie, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. We collaborate with a lot of different entities. And then ultimately the professional development. And that's probably the piece that we have been the most, we could actually push ahead with that during COVID. So we started something called the UEI Fellows, which is the Urban Extension Initiative Fellows Program. It's a longitudinal leadership program. It happens once a year. We took a hiatus this year because we're actually taking agents. We're going to do an urban visit to North Carolina at the end of January. But generally, we have a cohort every year. We meet once a month and we talk about different aspects and challenges that urban agents may have within more urban spaces. And then each agent gets to work on a project that directly connects to something programming that they're doing, or maybe something that they really have always wanted to try, but maybe didn't have the space to do in their normal programming area. And we really try to push the idea of creativity and innovation. And the people that end up in the UEI fellows are generally, we try really hard to do 3 to 5 years at least, because you're not learning the brand new ropes of extension. And then ultimately also people who are at least self-select into thinking that they work in more urban spaces. There's no requirement that you have to say, hey, if you're not from these 3 counties, you can't participate, because there are people that definitely have the mindset that they work. We have some people that work in Ashland, Kentucky. Ashland's definitely not a city, but it's more populated in an area. And so how they're operating is much more in that space. So that fellows we've done this next year will be our 5th year. And so we've gotten 5 cohorts of individuals and it also provides them a space to be able to talk and discuss different aspects different challenges they deal with on a daily basis, and is kind of a safe space for a collaboration and a discussion. So I think that this work is really important. I've been in extension for a long time from a lot of different perspectives, and I don't think the urban piece is addressed quite enough. I think that extension does lots of different things well. And I think that urban is one of those spaces where we can absolutely remain relevant. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to do that down here, and we continue to work within these spaces down here and push it ahead. So with that, I should probably ask if there's any questions.
I have a question. So in Kentucky, is the structure so that Jeff has all the urban counties and he leads those urban counties? Like, are they like one region?
They are not. And that's where, Julie, that's an interesting question. That's where it's much more of a self-select scenario. Before COVID, we had an urban extension, kind of almost an interest group that would meet about every other month that would talk about different issues and stuff like that. And again, in all of these cases, it's not like they're categorized into one thing. It's like, okay, so I know that I'm the 4-H agent in Fayette County, which is where Lexington is, and I'm dealing with these things. So I'm going to go to this interest group. No, we're still broke up into districts according to regions. And so, there's probably urban areas in at least half of our regions across of Kentucky.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment about even Ashland, right? Because it's a metropolitan statistical area that connects to Ohio too. And like, it's almost like urban Appalachia. It's the most densely
Absolutely. That's a
populated
great way
area.
of describing it.
Yeah, it's the most densely populated area, and that's where people go. And I talked to a 4-H educator in our city on the other side, of the state line there, and they're like, "It's urban here."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, I
Oh,
see
yeah.
that." Like you're talking about scale, you're talking about diversity, more complexity, especially in that tri-state metro area. So appreciate that kind of inclusive approach that you're taking too.
Well, perception's reality, right?
Yeah.
Again, something that we talk a lot about in the fellows program is this idea between being an expert, the resident expert, and being a convener. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It does mean that if you feel like that you're in a more populated area and there's more resources and that you're not necessarily the primary gatekeeper for information, it makes sense to be a convener and try and pull groups together and pull other aspects, other government resources and committees and NGOs and things like that to pull them together to get things done. And that's just a different mindset. It doesn't make one better or worse than the other. It's just different.
All right, and even bringing in state specialists along with other those community partners. But like you said, like if you're the convener, how's that role evaluated in your promotion and tenure? How's that
Yep.
role evaluated in your performance report, and really working together to continue to tackle not just the professional development things, but those position descriptions, which I know Newell's worked on, and some of
Yep.
the personnel pieces that we need to continue to learn together. So,
Absolutely.
yes.
And I'll tell you, you can bring together 8, 10, 12 government organizations and have a really awesome all-day meeting, and you're not going to get the same credit that you'll get if you develop a, 5-part curriculum on, how to fit your pet or something like that. It's not, and that doesn't mean that one's better or worse than the other, but I feel like at some point we need to get to a space where everything is valued in an appropriate manner.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Chris. Yeah, you could develop that 5-part series and teach it, 5 times and have less than 100 participants, but it would be valued at a certain level more than if you brought together, 5 different municipalities and they ended up sharing services
Absolutely.
around fire, police, saving like millions of dollars or, whatever. It's just different. It's just different.
True. Absolutely.
So any other questions for Chris today or really any of our presenters?
The question, how did that urban initiative get started in Kentucky? Who was like the spearheading of it? And I also had a question about who's like leading your mentorship program, like who teaches it and that kind of stuff.
So if I remember correctly, I mean, I do actually remember sitting around a table with Jeff and with Brian going, poof, what should we work on? Jeff ended up in that position because, like I said, there was a reorganization. And so I feel like because we had taught some classes together and things like that, that we had a conversation. He's like, and we started talking about some of the different challenges in urban with urban agents and stuff and how they were having. And it just kind of organically came out of that. It was kind of what we used as a steering mechanism for activities and things that were coming out of the urban extension office, basically, or his, I mean, it's not an office, I guess it's Jeff, and I think he's got a secretary, but that's where it really came from, something to kind of frame what we were doing and to address the urban extension stuff down here in Kentucky. As far as, what was your second question?
So are you guys the ones leading the like
Yeah.
mentorship in, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so the fellows program, I developed the curriculum, and Jeff and I and Brian Haynes, we all take turns kind of facilitating and bringing content together. There occasionally we have guest speakers. I know Maria's come down and spoken with us, with our group, at least once or twice. And so, yeah, and the goal is at some point to bring back kind of people who have graduated from the program and to bring them almost in as, I don't want to call them mentors, but kind of people that can contribute expertise as well as engage and kind of continue that dialogue of people doing the work of the field, you know, and so that's the next horizon on what we're doing. And we finally have enough graduates to be pulling people back into that. But yeah, we're the ones that facilitate and kind of direct and design it.
Awesome. Thank you so
And
much for sharing.
And I think, Alyssa, too, that and probably Julie and Brenda can maybe remember this a little bit too, and maybe even Martha. Florida, in probably 2014-ish, based on some conversations that were happening nationally, that led to really the creation of the National Urban Extension Leaders, sort of spurred or encouraged Florida and really Brenda's predecessor, Charlie Baverina, to really begin to look at what might be done in Florida. And I know Jeff was connected to that, and Charlie and Jeff did some work together. There's an article that they published in the Journal of Extension at that time, which led to the development of an urban plan in Florida. And I think also it maybe helped spur Jeff's interest and maybe help lead him to kind of where he is today, and is maybe a little bit before even where Chris and Brian and Jeff Fugate connected with Jeff to kind of look at what could be done in Kentucky. But there had been some things that were being done sort of in pockets nationally. Dino DeSantis was working kind of in the Pittsburgh area with a unique model. Greg Gerlich was kind of leading some efforts to pull together, had just developed kind of the unique metro model in Washington State around the Seattle area. And so Jeff was, that out of those things and connections and interests, Newell also came together. That I think sort of spurred some of that on and connected people. And it really, Julie was talking about, professional competencies kind of going like this. I think the same conversation around 2013, 14, 15 was happening as well around urban, that kind of led to some of this as well. Any other thoughts or questions today? Great. Chris, thank you for your presentation. And again, I want to thank all the presenters, Chris, Julie, Alyssa, and for being with us here today, and Ramona for contributing to the presentation in her work, and to Brenda for providing leadership in this space for the National Urban Extension Leaders Professional Development Action Team. And so thank you all for participating today. Everyone have a great evening and enjoy yourselves wherever you are on this day. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Marie. And if, I don't know if Marie or Brenda, if you can save